Good morning, Hokie Nation. We got a big one coming up this Thursday. Syracuse is in town to take on Virginia Tech. Night game inside Lane Stadium, primetime on ESPN. We're going to unpack all of it for you on our Syracuse preview podcast. It's episode 322 of the Tech Sideline podcast, and it's coming up right now. We record on Tuesday, October 24th, 2023 from our Tech Sideline studio in the Virginia Tech Corporate Research Center. If you're watching on YouTube, make sure to give us a like, subscribe, leave us a comment as well, and please refer the show to a friend. Well, we got a little bit of a different look on this set today. Not our typical football crew, but definitely going to be a great show nevertheless. To my right, founder and general manager Will Stewart. Across the way, senior staff writer Andy Bitter. Producing behind the scenes, Bobby B, as we call him, Mr. Robert Bateman. And I'm your host, Giovanni Heater. So, Will, I'll give you the opportunity here to maybe disclose why the football crew looks so different today. We got a lot of people down at the ACC tip-off.
First of all, I didn't know that we called Rob Bobby B.
Yeah, that's a friend group thing right there.
That's good to know. Okay. Yeah, so a little bit different crew today because, let's see, Chris is out. David is down in Charlotte for the both basketball tip-offs, men and women. And he's got Carter Hill with him and Jack Brizendine with him. So we do not have a fourth chair today. We also, it's worth noting that the person who wrote the preview, who was David Cunningham, is not here. So we'll see how it goes.
Yeah.
Plus, I'm trying to dust off the rusty bit here.
Well, people were calling for you to join the show once again, so obviously we're
be careful what you wish for. You may get it.
Listen, this is just a next man up mentality here. That's how you have to do it, just like a football team.
We
Somebody's out, next man up. That's how we do it.
We have a very strong.
We have a lot of veteran leadership in the Chudy.
Yeah. Lately, Andy's had the highest PFF grades, and he and Chris kind of go back and forth. And anytime I get in, a little lower PFF grade, but I do bring something different to the table.
Yeah, I think that Andy Bitter's acquisition in the offseason definitely brought us up to playoff contention. No doubt
overrated.
About it.
Overrated. Always has been.
All right. Well,
according to Twitter.
He's playing without a contract. He could transfer at any time.
That's fair. We better try and incentivize him to keep him around. Well, the Tech Sideline podcast is presented by First Bank and Trust Company, but the TSL podcast is also brought to you by Alumni Hall. It is the place to gear up for Hokie games. Located in the First and Main Shopping Center in Blacksburg, they've been serving Hokie fans for 15 years. Order your Hokies gear online at alumnihall.com. All right, fellas, Thursday night. Obviously, it means a little something special here at Virginia Tech. Brent Pry talked about it all week. Syracuse is in town, and I want to bring this up and start the conversation here. If the Hokies win, you're looking at 3-1 in the ACC. UNC just really stirred the pot with a loss to UVA last week to really just kind of open the doors wide open. I mean,
I'm sorry, I think that's funny.
That UVA took down UNC?
That's amazing. That's just amazing. The weird part is I wasn't really surprised by it,
Yeah.
UNC just has a habit of laying an egg every year. And I've watched UVA.
plays them tough, too. Historically, they play them tough.
And UVA's record was bad, but I'd seen them play a few times and thought there was some potential there. So anyway, didn't mean to derail the podcast.
No, not at all. So my question to you guys is you win this game, you're 3-1 in conference play. All of a sudden, the rest of the year gets a lot more interesting week after week to talk about things like ACC championship appearance and things like that. Andy?
You win, you're 3-1 at the midway point of ACC play. You have 4 games left. Obviously a tough one at Louisville. Then you get BC. Looked a little bit better last week. I'll tell you, that Castellanos character at quarterback is going to be tough to handle.
He can run.
Chestnut Hill. I don't care how BC is, just mobile quarterback like that is going to be tough to handle. NC State has not played that well lately. Virginia, we just said, rises up and beats UNC like that, perhaps a little bit tougher than we were giving them credit for before. But that's still a pretty manageable schedule. So if you could get to 3-1 and you have that left, I mean, anything is possible in that situation. You lose this game, All of a sudden, you're 2-2. You're going to Louisville. You're probably an underdog there, and you lose that game. All of a sudden, you have to win out to get bowl eligible. So this is a really key game on the schedule, I think. I mean, if they can win, it sets them up very nicely for the rest of the season. I think they're in a pretty good spot for bowl eligibility. They lose this one, I think it might be tough to get to a bowl just based on what's left and having no outs the rest of the season, basically, to get there.
Do you think? Oh, go ahead, Will.
Well, we say every week how important the game is. But the problem is with the losses to Marshall and Rutgers and Purdue, yes, that makes this a hugely important game. It was going to be, it's a hugely important game in the context of the overall season and going to a bowl, but also in the ACC. I mean, when Tech was 1-3, if you had told me that they would be playing, I mean, if they win Thursday night, they'll be tied for second at that moment in the ACC. Pretty remarkable.
Yeah. So is it too early to be having, do we have to tell Tech fans to settle down with the whole ACC championship talk? According to ESPN right now, they have their appearance odds. Florida State has a 99% chance to make the ACC championship game. UNC 36%, Duke 26%, Louisville 26%. Tech is next with a 5% chance. Below them, it's Miami and Clemson, who both have a pair of conference losses.
It is absolutely too soon to be talking about that. I mean, 2-1, you're not even at the halfway point of the season. You've beaten the two of the three worst teams in the ACC record-wise. You currently have the worst team coming in record-wise. I don't know if Syracuse is worse than Pitt and Wake Forest. I would not put them lower than them in my mind in terms of how good they are, but record-wise, they are 0-3 right now in the ACC. So even if they win this game, you're talking about being 3-1 in league play, having beaten, you know, record-wise, the three worst teams in the ACC. So I would maybe pump the brakes on an ACC championship game talk. Don't talk yourself into that at this point. If you win this one and beat Louisville, then all of a sudden, yes, that can come into the conversation, because that would be, you know, taking the show on the road, beating a team like Louisville, that would be good. But, you know, you got to beat Syracuse first, then you got to get to Louisville, and then maybe you can start thinking about it.
Louisville certainly proved that they're vulnerable. They went on the road and kind of got their butt kicked against Pitt couple of weeks ago.
They did, but they also beat Notre Dame at home. So I mean, this is the ACC this year. I mean, it's Florida State at the top, and I think there's a pretty big gap before you get to that, you know, creamy middle of the ACC where just sort of everybody is in there, and even the bad teams in the ACC I think are closer, you know, to the top two, the second place team than maybe Florida State is to that second tier team.
It would be very, very fun though. I mean, think about if like Tech played an ACC championship game, but they had like an 8-4 record or something. That would be.
They'd be like Northwestern. Did Northwestern go like 6-6 one year and make the Big Ten title game?
But that's because the Big Ten's so lopsided.
It is,
you know,
and historically the ACC has been like that too with the Coastal, where it's like anything could happen in the Coastal. But this is an interesting year, and the tiebreakers are going to be strange. I mean, Virginia Tech does not play UNC. UNC does not play Florida State, and it's going to come in. It's going to come down to like how you did against a common opponent further down the line. So it'll be some strange tiebreaker like that. I feel like it's really wide open for that second spot right now.
Well, back before Florida State got good, and then, you know, and won the national championship, and then Clemson got good. Yeah, it was again, I'd lose the details, but there were a lot of years where I think the Atlantic champion was 5-3 in the ACC or something like that.
Wow.
So there is a precedent there.
Interesting. Well, one thing that surprised me a little bit here, and correct me if I'm wrong, I have not seen it anywhere. Not a sellout yet. Andy, you said earlier in the year you wouldn't be shocked because it is a Thursday, tougher to get people to travel, but West Virginia last year was sold out. I think that was the first game to sell out. Granted, it was earlier in the season. Are you guys surprised we have not seen that announcement yet?
No, for the reason I mentioned before. Just, you know, middle of the week. I mean, if you're trying to get the students there, sure. I mean, they're right there on campus. They just walk down the street and do it. If you're trying to get people that have to work on Friday, that's tougher. I can imagine a lot of them have to sell off their tickets in that situation. Not us. This is just all we do is just go to football games. This is our job. We're required to go to the games. But for a lot of people, it is a heavy lift to try to get there on a Thursday night. Like, if you're trying to get there for the game, you got to take off work Thursday probably to get down there. If you're trying to get back, you're probably taking Friday off. So all of a sudden, are you making it a 4-day weekend? I think it makes it difficult sometimes.
Yeah, and it's not just that. You know, Virginia Tech's history on Thursday night goes all the way back to 1994. And no, I don't have this encyclopedic information in my head, but I'm betting in 1994 hotel rooms were not jacked up like they are now.
Oh, I'm sure.
So that's another thing that factors in. It's not just the time off from work. It's if you're coming for a Thursday night game and you don't own a property in the area or live in the area, yeah, you're paying for a hotel room. So that's another thing I think factors into it.
Well, let us preview the Orange a little bit here. 4-3 on the season is Syracuse. They started 4-0, undefeated. Syracuse kind of does this thing year after year where they get to a hot start. Andy says because they don't play anybody. Very, very hard to argue that statement. Now 3 straight losses for Syracuse. Did come to 3 of the best teams in the ACC. We know Clemson is not Clemson. They started their losing streak against Clemson at home. Then they played arguably the top 2 teams in the ACC, both on the road. Got absolutely demolished by both UNC and Florida State, to say it frankly. Haven't won a game since beating Army 5 weeks ago on September 23rd. Just almost feels like the 2 programs facing off Thursday night are going in polar opposite directions. Tech's on this climb here, winning 2 of their last 3, and Syracuse is on a skid.
So before we get into that, fill everybody in on exactly what the scores were against FSU, Clemson, and UNC for Syracuse.
Let's see.
Sorry to put you on the spot.
No, you're good. I know it was 40-7 against Carolina. Florida State, I know they scored 3. I think it was 41-3. 41-3. And then Clemson.
Was it 31-14 against Clemson? Does that sound familiar?
That sounds about right.
Yeah.
Let's
Looks like
double check.
they've been outscored 112-24 in their last 3 games.
By those 3 teams.
31-14 Clemson, 40-7 North Carolina, 41-3 Florida State.
Yeah.
Not pretty.
And we know that the transitive property of football doesn't work.
Right.
It's fun to say this stuff, but Florida State beat Syracuse a lot worse than they beat Virginia Tech.
But Syracuse beat Purdue. Purdue beat Virginia Tech.
They beat Purdue on the road too by 2
This
touchdowns.
is why you can't go by that. And
Right.
also that was a long time ago. I mean, we're talking about over a month ago. These teams are in sort of different places. Kyron Drone's starting a quarterback now. He wasn't against Purdue. They only put him in at the tail end. So there's a lot of differences between now and then. This is why some people like to use that as an argument for who's the better team. I think you got to shift away from that.
I think one of the biggest differences between now and then, granted they did not have either of these 2 players in that game, but this is a banged up Syracuse team. Getting thin on the offensive line, had a season-ending injury there. Getting a little bit thin on the defense as well, which is kind of 101 for Syracuse, situation where they have some really good first-string guys year after year. They're putting guys into the NFL, particularly in the secondary. Those guys go out, then they have nobody to really fill those shoes at that level. A lot of freshmen playing on the defensive side of the ball. But the 2 biggest losses have to be your top 2 wide receivers. Oronde Gadsden, technically listed as a tight end. I know Andy has a gripe about that, just like I do. And then Isaiah Jones as well. Tough to have a passing game when you lose your top 2 targets.
Yeah, Gadsden especially. And I don't like that they list him as a tight end. They listed him as the tight end in the preseason All-ACC balloting. So he was the runaway winner of that. It's like, well, he doesn't play tight end. Like 95% of his snaps are at receiver. It's like the whole Bucky Hodges thing when he was here. And people are like, oh, he holds all the tight end receiving records. It's like, okay, well, that's sort of a disservice to Mike Burnup when Bucky Hodges was playing receiver for 3 of those years, racking up those stats. So it always bothers me when they do that because I feel like they're sneaking him onto the All-ACC team when he could have made it just as a receiver on his own merits. I was going to vote for him preseason as a receiver, and they put him at tight end. It's just like, okay, that's not his position. I've gone off on a tangent here. He's been out the whole year, but he was just such a big, reliable target in that passing game, and they've still thrown it okay. But I mean, you take a weapon like that out of the offense, it's just a lot tougher to move the ball, and it's one less security blanket for Schrader when he has to throw the ball.
No doubt about it. And then Isaiah Jones, a guy who both of them were injured in the same game against Western Michigan and have not played since. But Isaiah Jones in the first pair of games, 71 yards on 3 catches and 2 scores in the season opener, and then had 5 catches for 86 yards in the second game he played. A junior for Syracuse, another huge target. He's 6'4", Gadsden 6'5". Those were your 2 big time outside guys.
Do we know that Jones is out for this game? It sounds like he dressed a couple weeks ago and went through warm-ups and didn't play against Florida State, but we're talking about 10 days ago,
right?
By the time this game gets played. So I wonder if he's closer to playing, and I'm sure Dino is not going to give an injury update beforehand.
It had been said, like you had mentioned earlier when we were talking off the air, Dino had said in the press conference, he's going to be out for a while. That was probably 4 weeks ago at this point. That was after he got hurt, I believe, going into the Clemson game, maybe, or the Purdue game. So I guess
Dino
we'll see.
gives injury updates about like Brent Pry does. Very oblique about how everything's going to happen.
I'm kind of surprised he goes as far as to say he's going to be out for a while. A lot of coaches will just kind of be like, yeah, he's banged up right now. You know,
he's questionable for this game.
Right.
It did sound, when you were talking about it, it did sound a bit like the Brent Pry strategy that he's been using earlier this year.
Yes. Well, how about the offensive run game, though, for Syracuse? Certainly their strength, and it starts with quarterback Garrett Schrader. Such a huge body. I would make the argument, and this is, again, putting biases aside, probably the most difficult running quarterback Virginia Tech will play this year. You know, Jordan Travis, obviously dynamic runner, but remember, he was a little bit banged up, maybe not 100% for Florida State in that ball game. Schrader, 6'4", 225, fourth most rushing yards for a quarterback in the ACC with 358 yards on the ground. 6 rushing touchdowns this year. That's tied for 6th in the conference for all rushers. Just a guy that can run the rock.
And he's big. Like, I mean, he's like a tight end running the ball. And, you know, last time he came in to Lane Stadium, I mean, he just tore Virginia Tech apart in that game. What was it?
170 some yards
174 yards
Yeah.
rushing, I think. It was the third most by a quarterback against the Hokies since 1987. And not only that, he throws the game-winning touchdown at the end over the top to effectively end the Justin Fuente era. I think it was just him, you know, playing out the string at that point. So
that was when the Fire Fuente chants were happening.
yeah, it was. I believe that made it into my game story at that point. But I mean, he hasn't been as consistent as he's been in the past. I think a lot of that is due to his receivers being out. But man, he's just a load to bring down. I mean, you're not going to arm tackle that guy. Maybe you can with some quarterbacks, but he's not going to go down with one guy just kind of like breathing on him like a lot of quarterbacks. You're going to have to take team effort to get him on the ground, and you know he'll fall forward. He'll get some extra yards that way.
I would say, based on, I don't know, I watched a little bit of Boston College last weekend, and that quarterback of theirs is scary. He is a scary runner, different kind of runner. So to add a little color to what you're saying about Schrader, this is in David's game preview. In his career, this is his 4th year at Syracuse, correct? He has 401 carries for almost 1,600.
Third year at Syracuse.
Third year, okay. He has 401 carries for about 1,600 yards. That would rank 2nd at Tech in terms of rushing numbers by a quarterback, behind Tyrod Taylor, who had 2,200 yards. Michael Vick, of course, would have had more, but he was only here a couple of years. So that kind of puts it into perspective. He is a very good running quarterback, and he's not a complete slouch passing the ball either. This season, he's a 62% completion rate, which is not great, but that's solid. You know, Virginia Tech quarterbacks have been hovering around high 50s, low 60s the last few years. 1,371 yards, 8 touchdowns, and 5 interceptions. That's not a great ratio, but, you know, this is a guy, 3 years of experience, so he's been there and done that.
I think Schrader's actually taken a little bit of a digression in his passing game, and I think it's largely in part to you lose Robert Anai. Anai took him to a whole different level because he was purely a runner. Really struggled to throw the ball in 2021 when they came down here and beat Tech, and it showed in that game. I think he only had 150 yards through the air. He did have 2 touchdowns in the last 5.5 minutes to win the game, but it was really a running show. Last year is really when they kicked it up a notch and he could throw the football. Then this year, Robert Anai leaves, meets back up with Brennan Armstrong at NC State. Jason Beck, who is the quarterback's coach, takes over as the OC, and it's just not quite the same. Whether it's an experience thing, Beck is now a first-time offensive coordinator. Schrader seems to be taking a step backwards in the passing game. How about this, though? This was pretty interesting to me. Schrader and Chris Marv were at Mississippi State for 1 year at the same time back in 2019, so Marv was coaching against him in practice.
Coached against him in practice. Then he went to Florida State, and Schrader went to Syracuse, and they played before. Schrader had a big game down in Tallahassee. It was like a 137 rushing yards, 3 touchdowns type game.
And I think they lost 33 to 30.
Yeah, Florida State won on a field goal as time expired, I believe. But Marv has a history of knowing him a little bit and going up against him, so he knows the challenge that Schrader presents in this game.
Garrett Schrader against Purdue earlier this year, which is worth noting because it's a familiar opponent for Virginia Tech. Hokies obviously lost to the Boilermakers in Lane. Schrader had 25 carries for 195 yards and 4 touchdowns. So just shows.
That's more than 11 rushing yards.
That is
what the Hokies
more than 11.
Purdue, so.
But the Hokies did not have KD1 under center, though.
It does change things, yes.
It does.
All right, so let's correct the numbers from 2021. Your memory's fairly accurate. You say he had about 150 yards passing. He was 16 to 34, so he was below 50%. He had about 150 yards until he threw those 2 touchdown passes in the fourth quarter.
Okay.
So he wound up with 236 yards passing and 174 rushing. That's 410 yards of offense.
Wow.
It was a big game.
He balled out.
I think they had lost to Notre Dame the previous week in heartbreaking fashion, or maybe it was Pitt. I can't remember the order of those losses, but to lose another one at the tail end like that, it was just such a deflating feeling in Lane Stadium. That's why you could hear those chants so clearly, is because it was dead silent in that stadium after they lost that.
This was a 42-yard touchdown, and Damian Alford's the one that caught that. He'll play in this game. They do have some good receiving talent. Amari Hatcher, Damian Alford, those guys will play, and Alford's the one that caught that game winner.
And they ruined those throwback jerseys. That was where they were wearing the 99 throwbacks, and they haven't worn them. That was the only time they wore them.
They wore them in the bowl game.
They wore them in the bowl game. Another great memory for Hokies fans, the bowl game. But it's like, okay,
Maryland.
You break these out, they look gorgeous, and they never wear them again because of that, probably.
Well, the other thing that is like, I was actually complaining to Will about this yesterday. I was like, those uniforms are so nice, and they let the seniors all take them. This is what I've been told from like people in athletics. They let the seniors all take them because they had the bowl patch and everything, and you get to take your bowl jersey. And now they don't have enough to field a team with them. And it's like, well, what was the point in getting those? You used them for one
Nike
game.
should hook them up and get them some more because they look great. They should. It's like the Eagles the other night wearing those Kelly Green jerseys. It's like, oh, why do you ever go away from these? These things are awesome.
I think we got to bring back more of the historical look anyways. Like when the new contract's up and they make the new uniforms, possibly going into next year, whatever year it may be. I think you got to go back to the roots a little bit. A lot of Hokie fans feel that way on Twitter, it seems.
Well, they certainly dislike the current uniforms because they've been lousy in them.
Right, if you're winning in them.
Ever since they switched them, and it's completely related to how the team has performed on the field, which has nothing to do with the uniforms, but that's the association fans are going to make with it.
The back looks like it's a bib. Let's just call it what it is,
It does. Well, the running game doesn't stop with Garrett Schrader either. They got LeQuint Allen out of the backfield. A smaller, shiftier running back, 6 foot, 195 pounder, but that's kind of the guy that Tech has struggled against a little bit this season. I take you all the way back to like Keyshawn Wicks for ODU. Smaller, shiftier guy that had some big playability. Fourth in the ACC with 511 yards on the ground and 7 touchdowns for LeQuint Allen. He leads the team in receptions as well out of the backfield. He's got 23 catches. That's the most by any Orange player all season for 157 yards and 110 rushing yards last week against Florida State. In the big loss, he was a bright spot.
He is, and he is a receiving threat too out of the backfield. Just sort of a jitterbug of a running back there, which departure from what they've had before. Sean Tucker was really a guy that was a bruiser. Where did he wasn't the biggest guy.
Where did he wind up going?
Tampa Bay.
He's with the Buccaneers.
I think. Yep. He wasn't the biggest guy, but he could run you over, and he was a physical runner like that. I don't think LeQuint is quite like that, but you have Schrader to fill that role in the backfield if you need it, as a guy that can get you a power yard like that, and LeQuint obviously has home run ability in that spot. So if you're a Hokies rushing defense I know things look good against Wake Forest last time out, but this is a whole different rushing threat here. This is a big quarterback you got to be wary of. This is a running back that can take it to the house. I think this is really going to test whether the Hokies have turned a corner on that front or whether they revert back to earlier in the season.
How many catches did you say he has on this season?
23.
I think it leads the team, I think.
He is the leader.
This roster card is horrible. First of all, under rushing, it lists LeQuint Allen by his first name. Should list him by his last name. And under receiving, I've got the wide receivers Hatcher and Alford. I don't have Allen listed.
I think he has fewer yards but more receptions.
Right, and anytime you're looking at statistics, some schools will list your leading receiver by number of catches, some by yards. So he leads them in number of catches, but you said it was only like 150 yards.
Yeah, it's 157 yards to Hatcher's 346 and Alford's 319. So it makes sense that those two are they are the bigger receiving threats yardage wise, no doubt.
But in general, if you look at their receiving list, it's like receiving by committee. There's a bunch of guys that have caught basically the same number of balls.
Yeah, Dan Valeri, the tight end's a guy you got to talk about. He's been very huge, especially stepping up with even though GADSDEN plays on the outside, he's technically I think both of them would have been on the field at the same time regardless, but that's definitely
one is a
name.
tight end, one is a receiver. That's
Correct.
how they do it.
Correct. He caught a big touchdown. That was kind of his first breakout type game, was against Clemson. Even though they lost, he looked pretty sharp against the Tigers in that one. Well, I can say on the other side of things that they are calling this a must-win up in Syracuse for the future of the season, as well as for the future of Dino Babers and this coaching staff. It's the 8th year. Dino Babers really has had one very successful year where they won 10 games, won the Camping World Bowl, beat West Virginia. Other than that, he's only been to one other bowl game. It was last year. They got beat pretty bad in the Pinstripe Bowl against Minnesota, and hasn't been great. Andy, you had an interesting stat about his ACC record.
Yeah, ACC record. He's been over 500 once in the first 7 years, and not looking good this year. They got exactly 500 last year. You get to year 8 in a program, and I know it's Syracuse, and I know the resources they have there and the resources they put into that program, and they're getting what they put into the program. But you have to wonder just how long a coach has there. And, Babers came in. He was in the same coaching class as Fuente, Bronco Mendenhall, and Mark Richt in the ACC, 2016. And I would not have guessed that he is the only one left standing. And not only the only one left standing, but by a couple years now. Both Fuente and Mendenhall leaving a couple years ago. Richt, obviously, before that. It just, you're pushing a decade at a school here, getting pretty close to that. And if you haven't produced more than 2 bowl trips in that time, one really special season that people remember, the 10-win year that they had, then they followed up immediately by going 5-7, then back to 1-10. I wonder how long he has there with the patience that they would have. I mean, even for a fan base that doesn't expect ACC championships all the time, that is probably pretty trying for that group to have to continue to watch him go out there and sort of have these mediocre to bad results.
Yeah, Syracuse is it's a tough place. They have a really good history. And I'll get into that in a second. I think that they've been hurt by the nationalization of recruiting. They used to be able to draw recruits from the area. I think
Jersey was their pipeline.
Yeah, and other schools are, and this has hurt Virginia Tech and UVA in the state of Virginia. Tech and UVA, there was a time where they just dominated recruiting in the state of Virginia. And now SEC schools come in, and some Big Ten schools to some extent. So recruiting is difficult there. Something I found out that I was interesting, I was doing in my Monday article this week, I talked a lot about the history of these two teams playing each other. And Virginia Tech beat Syracuse in 1993. And at that point in time, listen to this sentence, the Orange Men, they were the Orange Men back then, had the country's, over the course of the last 6 seasons leading up to 1993, Syracuse was 61-17-4, and that was the country's 7th best record. This was a good program in the 80s and 90s, and this whole Dino Babers discussion reminds me of the Paul Pasqualoni discussion that occurred back then. Pasqualoni won a lot of games at Syracuse. He won at least 2 Big East championships. He went to a Fiesta Bowl at one point. They were a really good program, but he couldn't quite get him over the hump to being a national factor. So he eventually got fired, and then they went into the tank. And they just haven't been the same ever since then because of the changes across college football. And I think when Dino Babers is having a good season at Syracuse, they're really good. Some of the guys they wind up with on their team, they get some talent in there, and so I'm not saying careful what you wish for. If you fire him, the program might tank. I don't really know exactly how good should Syracuse be. I don't know the answer to that.
Well, I remember talking to Phil Omasian when I did that story on him in the spring, and he had coached at Syracuse too, in addition to Virginia Tech. And he said, early 90s, Syracuse was like the model program for how they structured practice, very NFL-like. Pasqualoni was really on top of things like that. And it was sort of this forward-thinking program at the time. And then, you get through the 90s, mid to late 90s, you have Donovan McNabb.
Yeah.
So obviously the program's going to be competitive when he's there. And after he left, that's when it kind of fell off for Pasqualoni. They got rid of him. They were sort of in the wilderness there for a while with a couple coaches. I think, wasn't Greg Robinson?
Greg Robinson
was
the
a
worst
disaster
ever
of a hire. I mean, you could not have picked a worse hire than that. Doug Marrone got hired, brought it back a little bit.
And he left for the NFL.
There was a contract squabble, I thought, with him, and or maybe that was with the NFL when he's like, "I'm leaving if you don't give me a new contract." But
yeah, he was the head coach of the Buffalo Bills after that.
Scott Schaefer was in there. He did all right for a while. It wasn't great, but I feel like they have not had like that coach again up there.
No, not at all.
And,
and a pivotal point for them was when they lost the recruiting battle for Michael Vick. You know,
it was, yeah.
Their pitch was come be the next Donovan McNabb, but it was just too far away from home.
Too far away from home. He went up there and he was like sick the whole time on his recruiting visit, so that didn't help.
Yay.
Dwight Vick, it was here at Virginia Tech. He was hammering the stay-at-home type thing. So that was sort of a sliding doors moment in the two programs' history. It's like, what would have happened if Vick went up there and continued that versus coming down here? What would Virginia Tech have been if Vick didn't come here?
Tech would be ECU. Close to it, maybe.
Possibly. I don't know. I don't know if they have enough success and enough clout to get into the ACC.
Yeah, the ECU discussion.
Without that ACC champion or that national championship appearance, I don't think it happens.
Right.
Because the ACC didn't want them in the first place, and if you don't have that history and an ally in Virginia that actually got them in, that helped get them in, I don't think that happens at that point.
Yeah, the ECU discussion is interesting because the two programs were very comparable. Virginia Tech and ECU, and in the late 80s, ECU was better. And then Tech got into the Big East and ECU didn't. And they've just gradually gone in well, it's not so gradual anymore. They went in two different directions.
Yeah. And a lot of people say that the biggest fall off was Vic not going. And then when they hired Daryl Gross as the athletic director, they brought him in from USC. And he fired Pasqualoni, and that was kind of when everything fell apart. And I guess whatever he did wasn't great for basketball either. I guess they tried to bring a West Coast philosophy to the Northeast, and it kind of derailed the athletics program altogether for a little bit there.
West Coast philosophy to a school that gets like 20-inch snowfalls regularly. And so
right.
Maybe not the best plan. I know it's not weather related, but still.
Absolutely. Well, let's talk about this history a little bit, right? Will wrote a fantastic article, his Monday Thoughts yesterday. Definitely go check it out. I encourage you to do that, no doubt. It was a fun read. It was a trip. I would say a trip down memory lane, but I wasn't around for the majority of it. Anyway, but these are the stories that I grew up hearing. I'll start by asking you guys this. When I talk to my dad, my grandpa, these big-time Syracuse football fans, they look at Virginia Tech as a big rivalry. It's like West Virginia #1 and Virginia Tech. Does Tech feel the same way? Is this a rivalry in Virginia Tech's eyes? I don't think the modern fan, the students, feel that way, but how about the guys that have been around for a while?
I don't think so. I think you look at even back to, it's certainly not now. They don't play frequently enough now to be considered rivals at all, but you look back in that Big East time, I put Miami as a bigger rivalry there. I put West Virginia as a bigger rivalry there. So maybe third. Who else? Who am I missing?
I think that's fair. You're missing Pitt, but that was later. Pitt was bad for a while.
Boston College, not quite. And Boston College has been their quote unquote rival in the ACC, but I don't think anybody looks at that game and is like, oh, this is the game we look forward to all the time. So maybe third of those three. But when you have Miami at the top and West Virginia, a neighboring state like that just engenders so much hate in this rivalry, it's tough to put it up there at the top.
Yeah, talking about the Big East, the first thing you have to wrap your mind around is there were only 8 teams in the conference, which doesn't happen these days. So everybody played each other every year, and some of these schools had a history with each other, some of them didn't. Virginia Tech had a history with West Virginia. They had played Miami some, but those of us who lived through the Big East started round robin play in 1993. Tech left in 2003, so Tech played 11 seasons. And while the conference was horrible in the way it treated Virginia Tech, the actual on-field football rivalries were fantastic. As Andy mentioned, it's like there are strata of rivalries, and the top rivalries were Virginia Tech, Miami, Virginia Tech, West Virginia, and Virginia Tech, Syracuse. Below that, they played Temple every year. They played Rutgers every year, and those two teams stunk, and nobody cared. It was just a breather in between, the important games. And BC kind of came in and out as far as being competitive, and Pitt was a bad football team for most of the 90s, and then they got good in the early 2000s and started beating Tech. I think they beat them in 01, 02, and 03, and then Tech left the conference. But so anyway, to answer your question, it was a big time series back then. And in looking at the games that they played during the Big East days, neither team won 2 in a row. I think there was a 7-year stretch where the home team won every time. And that's when we learned as Virginia Tech fans what a horrible place the Carrier Dome was to play. We can talk about a lot of the games, but one that really stands out as emblematic of I can't find the term I'm looking for, the effect that the Carrier Dome had was in 1996, Tech went 10-1 in the regular season. They were a very good football team, and they got smoked at Syracuse. 52-21, it wasn't even close. And that is all you need to know about how Tech played in the Carrier Dome. 2016, Tech had a very good football team, got stomped up in the Carrier Dome. It's just weird.
They've had some heartbreakers. I mean, what was the 98 game one where the McNabb threw back across the walk-off win there at the tail end.
Very iconic moment in Carrier Dome history.
There's the 50-42 game where I think that was one of those ones where Brian Randall accounted for like 6 touchdowns.
He had 504 yards passing,
and they lose the
5
game. I mean,
right?
just bad memories going up to the Carrier Dome. I think when Frank was on the college football committee, there was one year where Clemson lost to Syracuse early in the season.
Yeah,
and I think he's probably like, watch out about that Carrier Dome. That's a tough place to go up there and play. Whatever they call it now, I'm going to call it the Carrier Dome until they implode that place.
Something wireless
the
dome.
JMA wireless dome.
It's the Carrier Dome, and it will forever be. So
It is
free
the Carrier
advertising
Dome.
for Carrier air conditioning.
I literally have it. It's tattooed on my arm.
The Carrier
the
Dome?
building. Yeah, it's the Syracuse skyline, and the dome's right there.
Wow.
Yeah.
And you're hosting this You're allowed to host this podcast. My goodness, the comments are going to go crazy.
Oh,
after
we
seeing that.
do get snarky comments.
We read the comments, and the comments hurt, guys. That's messed up. No, there were a lot of people that did not want me to host this podcast.
Well, it took 18 minutes for the first Syracuse reference.
I didn't even bring it up. Chris or Andy brought it up. Yeah. I tried not to bring it up.
See, I think that's okay. I think it brings an interesting perspective. And whenever we preview Tech playing Syracuse, then you've got the knowledge of it. So I think it brings an interesting dynamic.
I feel like my knowledge is lacking this year in particular because they've been playing in the same time slot as Tech, and we're at the stadium. I mean, I'm hanging out at the stadium with Andy. I'm not watching all the other games. We miss all the other football.
I think that's the worst part about working college football as media is that you don't get to watch college football.
That's the best part about Thursday night games.
Yeah.
I'll have 2 straight Saturdays where I'll just be able to watch an entire
I just
slate
sat
of
there and
games.
watched. I had quad screen going last weekend watching college football, just like the rest of you guys always do. I never get to do that, and I had a blast.
So, of course, this week, right, I'm like, yes, Thursday night, I get to watch everything on Saturday. No, all my teams play each other playing Thursday night. Syracuse plays against Tech, and then the Bills have Thursday night football. There's no football to watch this weekend besides.
Interesting fact about Syracuse, Virginia Tech. When this happened, they scheduled this last year. I'm like, Thursday night, that feels like a very old Big East game. Yes. Virginia Tech, Syracuse have never played on Thursday night.
Yep,
the first time they'll do it.
That's pretty cool.
I found that kind of surprising. I thought at some point those teams would have. Just the history of the Big East and Virginia Tech playing on that night.
I really love what they did back in 2021, and this is a shout out to everyone in marketing or Hokie Vision or whoever makes all that happen, but they really jazzed it up. Obviously they had the throwback uniforms, but remember how they made the video board and all the stanchions across the stadium, like the throwback, old school video board.
99.
Yeah. It was very cool.
Yeah.
Like that vibe. And I thought they did a nice job.
It was nice. Yeah. That was wheelhouse of my sports fandom was, college years there.
Yeah.
Getting used to it. So it was nice to throw back to that.
They had
everything was great. Then Tech loses the game in excruciating fashion. It's like all that work for the marketing crew, and it's a game nobody wants to remember.
I remember I was out of town for that game. I was down in Florida, and I just knew that Tech was going to lose. When Syracuse had the ball at the end, I was not the least bit surprised when they threw that touchdown pass to win it.
Well, there was a play before Tech punted back to Syracuse where they had an open completion, yes. I think, and they did not get it, did not move the sticks. And you're like,
here it comes.
You feel this coming because it had happened twice before already. They had lost 2 games like that. They just kind of threw it away at the end. So, when it's feeling like that, that pops up. And I can't imagine that didn't pop into the players' minds. I know they like to say no, we're focused on this stuff. But when it happens a couple times before, it has to seep in, here we go again.
Now, you probably remember this. Do you remember who that pass was completed over, the defensive back on the play?
That was
Dorian Strong.
Dorian Strong.
He's a lot better now. He wasn't bad then, but he
That
was
was pretty good that year.
DB.
That was a rough moment for him. But
that was a really good pass and a really good catch. And the line was that Schrader couldn't pass a lick, but he could that day.
He got crushed on that play. Schrader took a hit.
Yep.
Bad. And he was like,
destroyed.
He stayed down. And Dino talked about in the press conference after, like when they came out, because like they came out as like an injury when Schrader went down, and Dino said, "Get up!" It went for a touchdown.
That's probably funny. Makes you real healthy. It's like smelling salts. There. It's like, okay, I'm back again.
Yeah. Well, how about this stat too? Dino Babers is, despite all of the losses in his career, undefeated when playing Virginia Tech. Obviously, 2016 and 2021. Syracuse has won 4 of the last 5 meetings between the two teams. They lead the all-time series 11 wins to the Hokies 8. Kind of interesting stuff right there. Granted, there was a big difference when they didn't play from 2003 all the way till 2016.
I do always love those stats. It's like, well, they've won 4 of the last 5. It's like, okay, well, what does 2001 and 2002 have to do with anything in relation to today's game? So those stats do sound interesting, but it's like over the span of 25 years, we're talking about 5 games. Right. Like maybe not as
so it's like what they
critical
did with Tech and Louisville in basketball. You know, Tech had something like a 16-game losing streak to Louisville, but at the bottom it would say Virginia Tech hasn't defeated Louisville since 1994 or something like that. Well, that's a little bit disingenuous. So what is important about this game is that, as you said, Syracuse has won the last 2. Virginia Tech hasn't beaten Syracuse since 2003. Ha ha ha.
That's the year I was born. So
anyway, Syracuse has won the last 2. In this series, neither team has won 3 in a row since Syracuse did it in 87, 88, and 92. Years in which Virginia Tech won a combined 7 games. So Virginia Tech was a bad football team back then. For those of us, again, who lived through the back and forth of the 90s, the thought of Syracuse winning a 3rd in a row and 5 out of 6, that's unusual in this series.
I'm also not convinced, this is something worth bringing up too, that Garrett Schrader is 100% healthy. Kind of a situation where they run him so much, ran him into the ground against Purdue. 25 carries, 194 yards, 4 touchdowns. Like they were just like, here, do the show. And you know, he just seems to the carries numbers. Andy, I believe it was you that pointed out in your article that the carries numbers have taken a little bit of a decrease for him in the last couple of games. Yet they're not winning, right? They got blown out in the last 2 against Carolina and Florida State. So take what you will with that. You'd think your best foot forward would be him running, but when you get down, you're forced to pass. What are your thoughts on, like, is he 100% healthy? Does it matter?
I don't know if he is, and I don't know if it matters.
Right.
I mean, they're gonna ride him if he's in there. You know, they did have an open week last week, like Virginia Tech, which probably came at a good time for them, as it does for every team in college football every time there's an open week.
Except when it's the season opener.
Yeah, I mean, you get 9-10 days of rest between games. I think you'll feel a little bit more fresh, and maybe even just getting two. You know, I know Tech gave their guys two off days last week, where even if they're doing a light lift or something like that, just not having to go out there and practice or do any, you know, sort of heavy hitting. I think that really does do a lot, not only, you know, physically, but mentally, just giving you a break like that. So, yeah, I think if he were going to be refreshed, this would be as refreshed as he would be based on, you know, the open week and getting to the midway point of the season, a little bit of a break.
Well, one thing that stands out big time against Syracuse as we talk about the defensive side of the ball briefly here is the red zone defense is very, very stout and one of the best in the country, matter of fact. To the contrast of that, Tech is not incredible in the red zone. Now, they're not bad, but that could be something that could stifle Virginia Tech on Saturday.
Yeah.
No, not Saturday, Thursday.
Thursday, you know, that Wake game could have been a lot bigger margin if Tech had converted in some of those red zone opportunities. I think they kicked 3 field goals after getting into the red zone. So rather short field goals. You don't want to be kicking those. I guess you'll take the points rather than not scoring points. But, you know, you look at Syracuse's stats, they're about middle of the pack for yards given up. So it seems like they give up a lot of yardage between the 20s and, you know, not the money zone where you have to stand up and make a play. And they get down close to the goal line and they're pretty salty down there. I think it's like 64% of the time teams score against them, which is good red zone scoring percentage. I mean, if teams are coming away with no points, 36% of the time or whatever the number is.
Yeah, Syracuse is
that's pretty good.
Syracuse is number 8 in the country in red zone defense. Now that to me that there's nuances to that stat that are not explored by the NCAA. So opponents score 2 out of 3 times. How many of those are touchdowns? How many of those are field goals?
Well, I think they have a pretty good TD percentage too.
I think
it's not quite as high as the red zone percentage, but part of it is like how often a team's going for 4th down against them down there, stuff like that. But whatever it is, they bow up in the red zone, and that's going to be something that the Hokies have to be a little bit better finishing drives here, getting more than 3 points on these if they want to win this.
So if you look at their conventional stats, they're pretty much a completely average football team. They rank in the 50s, 60s, 70s in a lot of stuff. But, of course, as we just talked about, the red zone defense is good. But the other thing that's good that you need to talk about is their 3rd down conversion percentage is 46%, which is 22nd in the country. They are a team that can extend drives. I don't think they're a particularly explosive team. Hopefully we don't get to find that out Thursday night. But they can extend drives, and I think that's critical for Virginia Tech. When you talk about the Virginia Tech run defense, don't give up the explosive plays and get off the field on 3rd down.
How about the 3-3-5 defense? What does that look bring to this matchup? Rocky Long, the defensive coordinator, Tony White, leaves for Nebraska. Who do? They bring in one of the founders of the 3-3-5 in Rocky Long from San Diego State to coach the defense. And kind of his trademark, it offers a rover spot. Obviously, you have one less on the D-line. What are your thoughts on it all, Andy?
Yeah, it sounds like they sort of mix up their fronts. They're not always nod front. They're bringing up different guys, a lot of movement to throw off the offensive line. So I think it's going to be a huge challenge for this Hokies offensive line, not only to clear the holes, but to just, pre-snap checks and, what are they switching up? Who do I have to block here? I think it's a lot for a young group. And somebody like Cade Moore we talked to yesterday talks about what a challenge that is for making the calls and recognizing what they're doing and not being, they do some fancy movement over here and not being thrown off by that. So, it's a unique defense. You don't see it every week. Obviously in Rocky Long, you have somebody who knows it very well, who in fact taught it to Tony White when he was a player and then replaces him as the defensive coordinator here. 73 years old, Rocky Long. I didn't think he'd still be coaching after, being out as the head coach at San Diego State, but here he is, and they're a pretty salty defense. Like I said, they make plays in the backfield. I think they're up there in tackles for loss.
They are, yeah.
In the country, get after the quarterback pretty well. Maybe give up some yards, but they also get those big plays that push teams back too.
Couple of guys to be on the lookout for. Caleb Okechukwu, he's a beast on the defensive line. And someone else, Marlo Wax, big linebacker for Syracuse. He's forced 3 fumbles and an interception this season, so he can really make big plays.
So my window into this stuff is I make up the roster card and I have to type in the starting lineups, and so the way Syracuse lists their team is they list a defensive end, a defensive tackle, and a defensive end. And those guys, we won't go through the names. 6'4", 276. Their defensive tackle, their listed defensive tackle is Kevin or Kavan. It's spelled with Darton.
Yeah.
5'11", 271. That's the guy in the middle of their defense. So the other defensive end is 6'4", 283. So they don't list a starter on defense over 285.
How many defensive lines is the defensive tackle smaller than the defensive ends weight wise? That's going to be an oddity.
And the defensive ends
college football.
The defensive ends are 6'4" and the tackle's 5'11". That's 5 inches.
It's very strange.
Needless to say, he plays bigger than he is. If that makes sense,
yeah.
Or he wouldn't be starting.
Right.
And then you get it. So they have a couple. Their outside linebackers are 6'4", 239 and 6'4", 224. So yeah, those are guys you can bring up on the line. I don't know if they ever put their hand in the dirt. I don't know that Syracuse that well. And then in addition to that, they've got the rover position who's 6'4", 231. So it's just an interesting spread of heights, weights, and positions.
It's fun to watch. It is a fun defense to watch, and it's generated a lot of defensive back talent. Like the guys that they've played in that rover are guys playing in the NFL right now. Trill Williams, Andre Cisco, some corners as well, like Garrett Wilson, all guys that have been drafted and are playing on Sundays. I ask you guys this as well. What is the recipe for a Hokies win? After you talk about Syracuse's defense, what they do offensively, what does Virginia Tech have to do? We really haven't talked much about the Hokies today.
Stop the run first and foremost. I mean, you could probably say that every single week about every single football game, but it's so true with this defense because I think they have pretty good pass defense. The games they've lost this year is when they've given up huge plays on the ground. And what Syracuse have, a pretty, potent rushing attack in a couple different ways with Schrader and LeQuint Allen. Offensively, I'd say run the ball, but I think you got to throw the ball in the Syracuse defense. I think they give up yards through the air. I think what we've seen with Drones the last couple weeks is he's a very capable passer, very capable of stepping in there, throwing it in a traditional way, pushing the ball down the field. And they've been very good at finding creative ways to throw the ball as well, moving them in the pocket a little bit. So, I think if they can throw the ball on offense, I think if they can stop the run on defense, and of course make a special teams play, because you saw what a difference that makes in a couple of these games where they had the kick return that gets them back in the game against Florida State, the fake punt that really turned the tide against Wake Forest. I mean, a splash play like that on special teams can make such a huge difference.
Yeah. So offensively, Syracuse their team pass efficiency defense is solid. It's number 52 in the country, but they are number 111 in yards given up. I'm not sure how to rectify, without watching all their games, how do you rectify that? So I think you're right. I think there's an opportunity there in the passing game. Talking about the Virginia Tech defense, you say stop the run, and my answer to that is how? So you look at the Virginia Tech offense and the way they changed their offensive approach at the Pitt game. Again, you guys know I'm not an analyst or an X and O guy, but they defended Wake Forest's mesh really well. What did they do? Did they bring guys down closer to the line and have them? So one of the things that some people were saying was, hey, man, just put your linebackers are having trouble making the right reads and going to the right gaps. Put them up closer to the line, blitz the gaps, and rely on your talented defensive backs to play man-on-man coverage. Will they take that sort of approach? I will say this about defending Syracuse, particularly when it comes to Schrader. When that guy comes through the line, don't catch him and fall down with him. That's an extra 2 or 3 yards, a guy that size. You've got to hit him hard, and try to drop him on the spot. So it'll be interesting to see what Virginia Tech's defensive approach is to stopping the run.
Easier said than done.
I know
for a 6'4", 225-pound,
particularly when Tech's linebackers are not particularly big and physical.
Yeah.
It's going to have to be a very physical game for either team to win, really, on Thursday night. But what better night to do it, right? On a Thursday. Want to play a little buy sell, or we're getting rid of the hold, so just buy or sell. All right, sounds good.
Buy or sell. Here we go.
Buy or sell. Lane Stadium sells out between now and Thursday. They announce a sellout.
I have an unfair advantage here. I have inside information.
Oh, boy.
I'm going to sell that.
I was going to sell before you said that, just because I think there'll be little patches in the corner. They don't quite get there.
That's terrible.
It's a shame.
I got like 20-something people coming, and I've advertised it as this is going to be this great sell.
Well, maybe
game.
if you had 40-something people coming, they would have sold this game out. Come on, Gio.
That's true.
I don't think they're not quite going to make it though.
That's a bummer. Still going to be a good crowd, nevertheless. Virginia Tech scores 30 or more points on Thursday.
I'll sell that.
Yeah, I'm going to sell that.
I picked them 23-20. I think. I think this will be more defensive than people think, based on how Syracuse has played against some of the top teams in the conference.
We said that about Pitt. We said that about Wake, and then
I'm going to say it again.
30.
I'm going to stick with it. I'm going to say it again.
All right.
So even with the whippings that they've taken recently, Syracuse only gives up 22 points a game.
Right.
So I'm selling that Tech will score 30 or more.
I'll play devil's advocate and say quality of competition. They've played 3 good teams, and they've played 4 really not good teams, and 2 of those 4 are really, really, really like irrelevant teams in Colgate and Western Michigan. So,
but Tech is
right in
neither
the middle.
good nor bad, right in the middle.
True.
So that's where we're going.
All right, I like it. Virginia Tech gives up less than 24 points.
I will buy because I said 20.
Okay.
I can't remember what I said. I believe I have to buy. I think I
said 21.
I think I said yeah.
All right. They're both buying.
Wow.
Oh, let me keep track of what we're doing here. You guys both sold. That was part of the assignment from here on out.
While we're doing that, I'll look up my game prediction.
Will sell.
I think you said 24-21 because I had 23-20. We were sort of in the same neighborhood.
Yeah.
Andy, sell. You guys both sold on the 30+ points.
Yes, sold that Virginia Tech will score more than 30.
Virginia Tech gives up less than 24. You guys both bought. Andy, buy. will.
That's a lot of faith in a run,
I know.
a run
I
defense.
know. I don't feel good about that one, but that was my score prediction, so I got to stand behind it.
How about Virginia Tech has 5 or more plays of 20 or more yards?
5. I'll buy. I'm gonna go buy. I think the opportunity is there in the air against the Syracuse defense.
That's you've picked it's like picking a good over under.
Yeah.
That's right there. Did you buy, Andy?
I did.
Dang, I gotta buy. I gotta be optimistic and
Nice. I like it. Virginia Tech has 3 or more sacks. Now, for some numbers to back up for you, Hokies 3rd best in the ACC in sacks, and Syracuse is 11th in the ACC in sacks against.
I am buying. I think they get after the quarterback pretty well, and I think Syracuse is not that great at protecting.
Okay.
Yeah, if Syracuse is forced to pass or they choose to pass, then yeah, I'm definitely buying. If they're smart, they'll just run the football a lot.
3 or more sacks. All right. Tech gets an interception. So Virginia Tech has the least interceptions in the ACC. They are tied with UVA and Boston College 4. That is tied for least interceptions in the ACC. But Schrader has thrown 5 this year to his 8 touchdowns.
It's a tough one because those are tough to predict.
They're fluky.
I will sell. I think they don't get one this game.
Okay.
I'm going to go counter and buy. If I remember the game preview correctly, Schrader's 5 interceptions. He hasn't thrown more than 1 in a game. He's thrown 1 in 5 separate games. I will buy because they don't protect the passer really well, and that is typically what will lead to interceptions. Horrible decisions can lead to interceptions, but pressure on the passer can lead to interceptions.
I think in order for Tech to win this game, they have to stop the run. And if they force them to pass, they're going to be in pretty decent shape because Cuse doesn't have the weapons to pass very well. Kyron Drones goes turnover free. We bring this up almost every week.
I'm going to sell until he gets through a game where he doesn't fumble the ball. He didn't lose the fumble last time, but the ball was on the ground.
Okay.
I'm going to sell.
I'm also selling that for that reason. He does put the ball on the ground a fair amount.
Syracuse throws the ball 25 or more times.
I'm going to sell. I think it's below that.
Andy has a great record on the line, by the way. He nailed it the last time we did this.
Schrader has 179 attempts in 7 games. That is 27 per game if my math skills are correct.
You got to remember they threw the ball a lot more against Colgate, Western Michigan than they did against quality opponents.
So I'm going to sell that they're going to pass it 25 or more times. I think they'll pass it fewer times than that.
All right. Schrader has 13 or more carries.
Buy. Yeah, I think they ride him.
I was surprised when I looked at the breakdown that he hasn't carried it more than that. He carried it 25 times against Purdue, but that was an outlier. Like 13 is actually closer to the average.
Yeah, I think some of those numbers, I mean, you're down 30-some points against Florida State.
Right.
Are you going to put your quarterback at risk at that
Fair.
point, especially if he's banged up? I think this is a game that will be tight, and if that's the case, I think he will carry it quite a bit.
Virginia Tech throws the ball 26 or more times. Against Wake, they threw it 29 times. Florida State, 27 times. Pitt, 19 times. Marshall, 25 times. Rutgers, 32 times.
I'm going to buy because I think it might be tough at times to run the ball on the Syracuse defense. I think they're going to have to throw it.
I'm going to buy that as well. Looking at Syracuse's personnel, they've got 1 or 2 guys in the defensive backfield that are dicey. So, yes, they can rush the quarterback pretty well. If you keep them off the quarterback, you can complete some passes. So I'll buy that.
They do so many of those like quick screens out is basically like a long
They're
handoff,
like running plays,
but it's like you get a pass credit for that too.
Also very true.
True. Kyron Drones, 60 or more rushing yards.
I'll buy it. I think he's got that ability, and he's got the ability to tuck and run, even if it's not a called running play. I know that the sack yardage counts against him, but I'll buy.
Okay.
I will also buy that.
Okay. Kyron Drones, 4 or more total touchdowns.
You'd
have to say
I
no,
would have to sell because I said 23 points.
Yeah, I think I picked Tech score to score 24.
All right. Jalen Lane, 60 or more receiving yards and a touchdown. So a little...
And a touchdown.
Yes, a little bit of a tag team. This I would sell on this personally.
I'm going to sell. You had the touchdown in there. I know what the parlay odds are on those yardage and touchdown parlays.
He scores a lot of touchdowns.
He does. I'm still going to sell.
Will?
I'm buying that, man.
Will's buying that. All right.
I got Tech scoring 24, and 7 of those are going to come from Lane.
With 60 yards too, though?
Yeah.
Okay.
Bill's
Nice.
got
He's got a 75-yard touchdown.
60-yard and a touchdown profit
Like,
boost
if you
on
add up
FanDuel
everything
here.
I'm saying, what does it come out to? Probably something ridiculous.
We're going to figure it out after the game.
I like how we do this. We get locked into our bad prediction, and we're like, well, I got to rearrange all my buy sells based on whether or not this prediction comes true that I spent like 3 minutes.
Right. That's true. Bayshore 2 and 15 or more carries, had 13 against Wake, 8 against Florida State, 24 against Pitt, 9 against Marshall, 11 against Rutgers.
I'll buy. I think the off week helped him maybe get healthy a little bit, and I would imagine they would feed him quite a bit in this game.
I think I have to sell that based on everything I've said about the passing game without doing an analytical approach to what I've said. You can't have it all. So I think,
that was kind of my thought. If they're going to throw, you can only do so much. There's only so many possessions to go around, right?
I think he'll be very effective running the ball. I just don't think he'll run it a lot.
Right. Malachi Thomas touchdown this week would be his first of the year.
Even though he scored 3 in a breakout game the last time they played Syracuse, I will sell this.
Okay.
Oh, I've got Lane scoring a touchdown so far. Yeah, I'm going to sell that.
Don't be chasing those long shot touchdown, anytime touchdown scorer bets. Those are killers. Those never hit.
Probably like plus 3,000. Something crazy. Hokies 230 or more yards through the air.
That's a good number.
I will buy. I think they're going to have to throw the ball more than they run the ball in this game.
Okay.
I think you've done, again, a very good job picking the number. I'll buy.
I was embarrassed the last time because Chris and Andy are like, these lines are horrible. So I was like, I have to do
get on your game.
Deep digging for this.
Much better lines here.
Virginia Tech 150 or more rushing yards.
I will sell that.
Okay. How about Syracuse under 175 rushing yards?
I'm going to sell that.
You think they'll rush for more? All right.
Yeah. Not a lot more, I hope.
Yeah, I think they will rush for more too. I think that's the strength of this offense.
So what will be like, what is the number for Tech to win the game? You think they have to hold Syracuse to under X amount of yards on the ground?
I don't know if it's like a number. It's kind of how they get there.
Yeah.
If they get 180 on 50 carries, I think you've done a good job defending the run. They get 180 on 4 carries, and it's like you're playing Marshall or you're playing Florida State where they break off these big runs. So I think it sort of depends, the tenor of the game and how they do over the majority of those carries.
Last but not least,
it said do not give up the explosive touchdown.
Yes.
Andy's right. You can, if they carry the ball 50 times and only get 180, 190 yards, that's solid.
Tech could use one of their own as well. Like it seems like every time somebody does something, the last couple of wins, Tech bites right back. Like when they had the kick return Wake Forest, and then Tech comes right out with a 75-yard touchdown. Could use one of those as well if you do give up the big play. Last but not least, Virginia Tech wins.
I said 23-20 Hokies. I'm buying this.
And he's buying.
I said 24-20. We all picked Tech to win.
Wow.
Always a bad sign. If that's the case. This is one that's going to be close. I thought about going the other way on this. You look at sort of the SP Plus, I think it picks it precisely. It's a tie, like 24-24.
Wow.
It gives the edge to Syracuse in terms of winning the game slightly, but I mean they have these teams almost dead even.
Yeah, a 2.5 point spread is basically an even game with home field advantage added in.
Right. And if Tech wins this game, are they going bowling? Buy or sell?
If they win this game, I think so.
Okay.
Yes. If not, I think it's really tough. Even though, you have 4 games left to, be 4 games left to win 3. You have a little bit of margin for error. I mean, the toughest one of the remaining schedule is coming up after this. And if you lose that one, then there's no margin for error. You got to win out. So I'd say it'd be pretty tough.
Yeah, it really is a pivot point. Like I said, we say this every week, but this one really is.
So you're going to buy or sell?
I'm buying that if they win, they go to a bowl. I'm buying that.
All right.
I'm also buying if they lose, they don't go to a bowl.
All right.
Yeah.
Fair enough. Well, that kind of wraps things up for today. Your final thoughts on going into Thursday, as well as what's coming up on TSL this week. Kind of a a different week. We got people all over the place. We got Chris out. You got a Thursday night game instead of a Saturday. So what's this look like content-wise?
I'll write a little bit about the defense. And, we talked to Chris Marv yesterday just about him taking over play calling. He's very confident about his play calling. I asked him, is there anything that surprised you in your first year doing this? He's like, no, I've been preparing for this ever since I got into coaching. So he's very diligent with how he goes about stuff. And I think that relationship between he and Pry, it's just an interesting one. And then Wednesday, I'll kind of be looking back at history of Thursday nighters with Virginia Tech, some of the highs, some of the lows, maybe rank the games by how good or bad they were. There are a lot in both categories. Let's put it that way. Some very memorable Thursday night games.
Fair enough.
Haven't checked my email this morning, but Brandon Patterson usually breaks down the opponent pregame for us. So I think that's probably coming in the next day or two. I mean, our two main editorial guys are David and Chris, and they're both out right now. But my take on the game in general is that, again, if you look at the history, and I went over all this in Monday Thoughts, it's just a remarkable history. There are no boring games here. Even the blowouts are interesting, like Tech beat Syracuse 51-7 at home in their last game in the Big East, and that thing was over in a hurry. Brian Randall ran for a 75-yard touchdown. Syracuse got the ball, punted D'Angelo Hall, he runs it back for a touchdown. 97 seconds later, D'Angelo Hall runs another punt back for a touchdown.
What?
So even the blowouts have been interesting games and just some incredible drama here. The only quarterback to ever win in the Carrier Dome, not that this matters Thursday night, is Michael Vick. Every other Virginia Tech quarterback has lost in the Carrier Dome. Because the Carrier Dome wasn't built in 1964, and I think that's the only road. Well, no, Tech didn't win that one either. Tech won in 1986. That may have been in the Carrier Dome.
I think the dome was built by then, yes.
Yeah. So it's a shame that
Dome opened in 1980 was the first game.
So Tech actually has won a game in the Carrier Dome other than the Michael Vick game. It's a shame that this series died when Virginia Tech left the Big East, because it has been a really good series, and I expect it to be a good game Thursday night, and it's already an important game. So good stuff.
Looking forward to it. Can't wait to hopefully talk about a Tech win on Monday. If anybody cares, the rooting interest, like, Tech needs it more. I would like to see Virginia Tech win this for the sake of our job being fun.
Are you going to change up your tattoo if that happens? Is that the stakes of this game?
No, I mean, for a little backstory, the thought process is I'd like to do like a sleeve of everywhere that I've lived for like a long period of time, because this career could, I guess, if it goes right, take you anywhere. Syracuse here. Would like to do something that has to do with Virginia Tech at some point after I graduate. So, yeah, it's part of the plan.
I'm thinking a Hokie bird head.
No, I don't know about all that.
Bold.
I don't know about all that.
Yeah.
You can get like the Frank 00 meme or something like that.
That'd be a good one. Get that.
So by the way,
I will not be getting a tattoo of anything. Thank you for that.
In doing research for my article on Monday, I've got copies of the old Hokie Huddler that used to be the athletic department newspaper from 1985 until I think they finally quit printing it in 08 or something like that. And when Virginia Tech beat Syracuse in 1993, Tech got the bowl invitation either that day or the next day. And there is a picture of Frank at the press conference where they're talking about the bowl invitation, and he's standing there like this with both hands in the air. And I was going to take a picture and put it on social media, except the mailing label was like right on top of the picture, so it kind of ruined it. I got a kick out of that. It was a much younger Frank Beamer.
Yeah. No kidding. All right, well, enjoy the game on Thursday, guys. We wish everybody down in Charlotte safe travels as well. We'll talk to you again on Monday. Syracuse and Virginia Tech coming up from Lane Stadium. 7:30 kickoff, prime time on ESPN. It's the national show during the week. So either get out to Lane or check it out on TV. But this has been episode 322 of the Tech Sideline Podcast. We'll remind you, as always, the Tech Sideline Podcast is brought to you by First Bank and Trust Company. Check out their new Checking with Perks account that comes with cell phone protection, roadside assistance, fuel savings, deals and discounts, and more. Visit firstbank.com to learn about this great new account for students. We'll see you next week.